Useless old man. That's what they called me in my own house, my own son, sitting at the lunch table in front of the whole family. He said it without lowering his voice, shameless as a summer noon, and I just stared at him, said nothing, kept chewing slow the piece of meat I had in my mouth, as if it hadn't hurt me. But of course it hurt. It's not easy to swallow something like that. Only, right then I understood it wasn't worth arguing, and the next day, with the sun barely slipping through the living room window, I got up, grabbed my keys, called the locksmith, and changed every lock in the house. The front door, the back door, the gate, everything, without telling anybody, without raising my voice, without making a scene. Because in that quiet I already knew. The ones out of place in that family weren't me. It was them. Let me tell you who I am, since if you're going to hear me, you should at least know the name of the old man talking to you. My name is Elijah Daniel Carter, though folks have called me Mr. Elijah my whole life. I was born in Jackson, Mississippi. I grew up working with my hands out in the country. I laid brick. I baked bread. I did a little of everything. I didn't get far in school, but I raised my family. I brought up my children with the little I had, always setting their plates down before mine. And now, with near 70 years on my back, they come and call me useless. Imagine that. That meal was on a Sunday. We were all seated, my sons, my grandkids, even that daughter-in-law who always looked at me like I was something tracked in from the street. It used to be the kind of lunch we made to celebrate. Now it felt more like a duty. I'd been noticing the odd air for weeks, silences, glances, like I was in the way just for opening the refrigerator. But that day was different. That day the hints ended. My youngest boy, the one I'd helped most when he lost his job, spit the poison straight. Useless old man. And I repeat, it's not that it didn't hurt. Inside it felt like someone pressed a brick on my chest. But I've learned that sometimes silence is stronger than 1,000 shouts, so I didn't say nothing. I just ate. I wiped my mouth, stood from the table, and went to my room. There, sitting on the bed, looking out the window, I thought the whole afternoon. I thought on everything I'd done for them and everything they were no longer willing to do for me. That night, while the rest slept, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. And when dawn came, without a word, I stepped out to the street. I walked to the neighborhood hardware store, the one Mr. Luther runs over on Sandtown Avenue, an old friend. I asked for new locks, the best he had, new keys, full sets, and he sold them without many questions. I went back home, slipped in quiet, everyone still sleeping, and in that hush I started changing the locks one by one with my own hands, because if I still have anything left, it's strength enough for that and dignity. When my son woke and saw what I was doing, he froze, face going pale. "What are you doing, Pop?" he asked. I looked him in the eye and answered calm. "Nothing. Fixing what was broken." Because in this life, son, there are things that if you don't close them, they never stop breaking. My boy's face that morning, believe me, I won't forget it as long as I live. His eyes were still heavy with sleep, but when he saw me kneeling at the entry, changing the locks with my own hands, the sleep flew off him at once. He didn't know whether to yell, step close, or ask, but he asked, of course, and I just told him that I was fixing what was broken. No need to say more. He didn't have the nerve to keep questioning, and I wasn't going to give more explanations. The rest of the family began to rise little by little. My grandkids, just old enough to be curious, leaned over the stairs, watching. My other children wore that scared look you get when you know something changed, but you don't yet understand how. And my daughter-in-law, always so good at making a victim's face, this time she couldn't even manage that. She stood in the kitchen with a cup in her hand, silent. When I finished the last lock, I stood slow, wiped my hands on an old rag, looked around, and with all the calm in the world, I spoke loud enough for everybody to hear. From today on, whoever wants to come into this house asks me. There are no keys for everybody anymore. That's over. You can imagine the silence that dropped over the room. No one dared say a thing, and I expected no less, because even if people think an old man don't have strength, what a man never loses is the right to be respected. And if that has to be taught with deeds, then so be it. A few long minutes passed in which everybody drifted back to whatever they were doing. Some pretended nothing had happened. Others played at being offended. But I wasn't going to step back, not after everything I'd endured. I went and sat in my armchair by the dining room window. From there I could see everything: the street, the yard, the entry. I lit a cigarette, though I shouldn't, for the lung, and stayed there thinking, remembering when I raised the house with my own hands. I didn't buy it made, no sir. That house we built little by little, with savings, with effort, brick by brick, roof by roof. And to think that now they wanted to make me feel I was the one in the way. My son, the one who called me useless, came near after a while. He walked slow, like a man about to ask for something but too scared to. And he said, "Pop, was this really necessary?" I looked him steady. I spoke with a calm voice, but firm. "You think I like having to do this? You think I'm happy changing locks, sitting here deciding who to let in and who not? No, son. There are things a man does not because he wants to, but because he's forced." He stayed quiet, and after a few seconds I let loose something I'd been holding a long time. "When you were children, how many times did I leave you outside this house? How many times did I close the door so you couldn't come in?" He lowered his eyes. "Never," he said. "Then understand me." I told him, I'd do this because I got no other choice. It wasn't a long conversation. Didn't need to be. He went back to the others, and I stayed there looking out the window, watching a neighborhood I knew by heart. Same streets, same faces, only now everything felt different. All that day there were no big fights and no shouting. Each person hunted a corner. Some started sending messages on their phones. Others shut themselves up in their rooms. But I knew it wouldn't be long before the talk began. And so it was. In the afternoon, while I swept the yard, I heard low voices in the kitchen, arguing among themselves. "What are we going to do now? Papa's lost it. What if he calls a lawyer?" Things like that. They thought I wasn't listening, but age teaches you how to tune your ear to what matters. That night, while we ate dinner, it was all silence. No one dared look me in the eyes, and instead of feeling bad, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: peace. Because after so much dry swallowing, I had finally set a limit. I had finally made it clear I'm not something you toss aside when it don't serve anymore. That night, after dinner, I rose from the table, went to my room, and before lying down, I pulled out an old notebook I keep in the dresser drawer. In it I've got the important things: names, dates, documents. I went through it page by page because, though no one had noticed, the house was still in my name. I had never changed the deed, never put anybody else as owner. And right then, that night, I made an even bigger decision. But I'll tell you about that in a moment, because the story wasn't finished yet. By morning, when the first sliver of sun was barely slipping through the living room windows, I was already awake, sitting in my armchair with the same black coffee I've made for myself every day for who knows how many years. I hardly slept, but not from nerves. No, I had already decided something bigger than just changing locks. That was done. What came next was putting things in order once and for all. So what had happened at that lunch table would never repeat itself. At 8 on the dot, I rose slow, went to my room, and pulled a big manila envelope from the dresser, where I kept my important papers, deeds, receipts, letters. There it was, the deed to the house, in my name, signed more than 40 years ago. And one more paper, a number I'd written down for a long time, but hadn't wanted to use until that day. The contact for a lawyer, an old acquaintance of mine, one of those who still respects an elder, Mr. Langston Pierce. I slid the envelope into my jacket, put on my hat, and stepped out while the house slept. I walked at the pace of a man with no hurry, but with purpose. Pierce's office wasn't far, just a few blocks up Magnolia Boulevard. He greeted me with a smile. He knew me from before, because years back I'd hauled and fitted a heavy oak bookcase for him when his office moved. "Mr. Elijah, what brings you out so early?" he asked, offering me a chair. I didn't circle around it. I set the envelope on his desk. "Langston, I want all this in order. I want to make sure that when I'm gone things go the way they should. And while I'm here, no one takes what is mine." He opened the envelope, looked through the papers, nodding slow. "Everything's well kept, Mr. Elijah. Are you looking to make a will, or to file a restriction on the property?" "Both," I said. "But more than the will. Right now, I want it written plain that this house cannot be sold, mortgaged, or touched by anybody without my signature, my authorization. Pierce started assembling the documents, asked me for IDs, details, while I told him briefly what had gone on at home. I didn't give names, no need. I just said my own son had forgotten what respect was, and I didn't intend to let that become a habit. We sat there near an hour, reading, signing, setting in order what had been stored away for years. When I left with those papers under my arm, I felt, how to say it, like I'd laid down a heavy load. Because now it wasn't only about pride, it was about law. I walked back the same way, nodding to the few neighbors who were up by then. It was mid-morning. When I opened the door with my new keys, yes, the new ones, I saw everyone already awake, moving about the living room, the kitchen. Some looked my way. Some pretended not to see me. I wasn't there to argue. I went straight to the dining table, set the envelope down, and called out firm, I want everyone to sit for a moment. I've got something to say. They gathered, some tight-lipped, others curious. My son, the one who'd spit that word at me, came last. When all were seated, I lowered myself into a chair, hat in my hand, and spoke slow, like telling an important story. I know these last days have felt strange, and maybe some of you think I went too far changing the locks. But I want you to understand. I raised this house with my own hands. It cost me years, sweat, sacrifices. It's still in my name. Today I met with a lawyer and signed papers to make that clearer than ever. No one can sell, move, or decide anything about this house if it isn't me. And when I'm gone, things will be divided according to those papers, not according to what you all decide. I watched the looks passing between them, the murmurs under breath. Some began protesting soft, others stayed silent. And let me add this, I continued. Respect isn't bought, and it isn't inherited. It's earned. If you respect me, this will remain your home. If you don't, there's the door, and the keys are with me. No yelling, no brawling, just that thick quiet that settles when truth is set down without ornaments. My son lowered his head. My daughter-in-law folded her arms. My grandchildren, poor things, didn't really understand. I stood, took the envelope, and before heading back to my armchair, I closed with one line I didn't need to raise my voice for. I'd rather be alone in my house than surrounded and treated like a burden. So you decide. I left them to think as they pleased, because sometimes the best lesson is an example, not hollow words. But that didn't mean everything was resolved. Some things, even spoken out loud, take time to settle. The days that followed were, how can I put it, calmer on the surface, but not inside. The house felt different. No more forced laughter, no more rough jokes from my boys. Everyone moved as if tiptoeing, careful not to set me off, as if they knew I'd said a serious line this time. And I'll confess this, it didn't give me joy. I didn't do it out of pride, but out of necessity. A man can be a good father, a good grandfather, a good neighbor, but there comes a time when if he doesn't demand respect, folks will walk right over him. Each morning I kept my same routine. I rose early, brewed my black coffee, and sat in the armchair by the window. I watched neighbors pass, nodded to those who nodded back, and thought about what I'd lived, how hard I'd worked to raise the house, how I'd gotten to this point. Sometimes I wondered when respect between father and son had cracked, because it hadn't always been like this. When my boys were little, they looked at me like I was the strongest man in the world. But years and life change people, sometimes for the worse. One afternoon, while I swept the yard, my youngest granddaughter came up. Her face wore that careful look of a child with a question they're afraid to ask. Without turning, I kept sweeping and said, "Go on, baby. Don't hold your doubt." She stayed quiet a beat then. "Granddad, why'd you change the keys?" That question hit soft but sure. It reminded me that for children things aren't as clear as for grown folks. I leaned a bit on the broom handle, because sometimes, to make grown-ups understand, you have to do things that seem strange, but it's so they don't forget that respect comes first. She nodded and asked no more. In her eyes I saw something I hadn't seen in that house for a long time: care. Real care, not pity, not duty. 2 weeks passed like that, no big clashes, just tension hanging in the air. I kept my papers put away, my things in order, nothing left in plain sight. I had learned not to trust completely, not even in family, because old age teaches you to see what you once didn't want to see. The sideways glances between your children, the coded talk, the planning. Maybe they were figuring how to take the house, my things, without me noticing. Then one day my eldest came with a paper in his hand. He's the quiet one, always has been, but now his face was set. He sat across from me and said, "Pop, I've been thinking, wouldn't it be better if we got everything arranged so there aren't fights later?" I looked him straight. I knew exactly what he meant. Without losing the calm, I said, "Why does it concern you now if it never did before?" He dropped his eyes. "We're not so young anymore, Pop. I just don't want problems between the brothers." I sipped my coffee, looked again, and said, "That's already arranged, son. I went to the lawyer. Everything is written and signed, and there shouldn't be problems because things will be done how I left them." He tightened his grip on the paper, but said nothing more. He stood and left, solemn. I sat alone again with my coffee, thinking how a man can live to see the day he must put limits on his own children. It's not easy, but sometimes it's the only way to keep things from flying apart. That same night, when the whole house was asleep, I got up again. I went to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and stood there for a long time just looking around. Every brick, every chair, every corner of that house carried my story, my sweat, my years. To anyone else, it was just a building, but to me it was everything. I promised myself, right there, I wouldn't let anyone take it from me. If the day came that I had to leave, it would be because I decided to, not because they threw me out. But what I didn't know then was that the decision I'd made weeks earlier, to change the locks and get my papers in order, would bring consequences I hadn't expected. Because children, when they start feeling left out, don't always react with calm. And I was about to find that out soon enough. I didn't need anyone to tell me. I could feel it in the air, something brewing. It wasn't just the silence or the way my sons looked at each other over their shoulders. It was how they lowered their voices when I walked into a room, or how they'd shut the door behind them, whispering into their phones. You don't have to be a mind reader to know when your own family is plotting something inside your own house. And let me tell you straight, it didn't surprise me. Because once you stop being useful to your kids, once you no longer give them what they expect, they stop seeing you as a father and start seeing you as an obstacle. As much as it hurts to admit, I'd already accepted it. It was a Wednesday afternoon. I was sitting in my usual armchair by the window, watching the sunlight fade slow down Pecan Street. The shadows stretched long and thin, that time of day I've always liked. It reminds me that a day ends, but not completely. Then my youngest son came over, the same one who'd called me useless, the one who'd looked at me like an old piece of furniture. He sat in front of me, hands together, staring down at the floor. "Pop," he started, using that soft tone people use when they're not sure where to begin. "We've been talking, me and my brothers." I didn't answer. I kept looking out the window because I already knew what was coming. "And we think," he went on, "that maybe it'd be better for you to stay somewhere you can be looked after, you know? Somewhere with nurses, doctors, a place for seniors." I slowly turned my eyes to him, calm, not angry, not even surprised. "A nursing home?" I asked, like I hadn't heard right. "It's not because we don't want you here, Pop," he said quick. "It's for your own good." I looked at him long, breathed deep, then said in the steadiest voice I could, "And you already picked a place?" He shrugged uneasy. "We've been looking yet." Right there I understood it all. It wasn't about care. It was about paper, about money, about the house. They wanted me out, plain and simple. Maybe they thought I'd just hand over the keys and shuffle away quietly. But they didn't know me. I said nothing more. I rose from my chair with my usual calm and walked to the kitchen. I opened the drawer where I kept my new keys, the only set. I held them for a second, felt the cold metal in my hand, then put them back. I knew it was time to act again. That night I didn't eat dinner with them. I closed my bedroom door and stayed there in silence, thinking about the day I laid the first brick of that house, about every hour I'd worked for my children, about whether I'd ever been unfair to them, whether I'd failed them somehow. But every time I searched my memory, I came to the same answer. I did the best I could with what I had. By morning, when the first light touched the windows, I was already awake. I dressed carefully, put on my light blue shirt, the one I always wear when something important's about to happen, and walked through the neighborhood. I passed Mr. Luther's hardware store, tipped my hat, and bought a new padlock. A heavy one, the kind you can't pop open with a screwdriver. When I got home, everyone was still asleep. I checked every door, every window, and sat again in my armchair waiting. When they started waking, one by one, I watched their faces, the confusion at seeing me dressed and calm like a man who'd already made a choice. My youngest was first to speak. "Pop, did you think about it?" I nodded slowly. "Yeah, I thought about it, and I decided I'm not going anywhere." He pressed his lips tight, angry already, but before he could speak, I raised my hand. And I decided something else too. I stood up, reached into my pocket, and pulled out the padlock, holding it up so everyone could see. "From today, this house will be locked with this. Whoever don't respect me, whoever thinks you can put your father out like trash, will leave, and won't come back." The room fell silent. No one moved. I walked to the gate, hooked the padlock onto the latch, and snapped it shut with the key. "That's how things get done," I said, pocketing the keys. Not with yelling, not with insults, but with action. And just like that, the house went quiet. Not one of them dared talk back, because right then they saw something they'd forgotten. The useless old man still had steady hands, strong enough to close a door and keep it shut. After that morning, after I locked the gate, the air in the house changed. It wasn't just awkward silence anymore. It was tension, thick as smoke. My kids still moved around, but I could feel their eyes on me. They thought I didn't notice the whispers, the looks when I passed, the quiet doors closing behind me. I noticed everything. And I'll tell you something. It wasn't revenge I felt, nor hate. It was respect. If they had to walk on eggshells to remember it, then so be it. One afternoon, while I was cleaning my old shotgun, the one I keep only for memory's sake, my middle son came over. He didn't say a word for a long while, just sat on the couch near me, head down, until finally he said, "Pop, I think we went too far." I didn't look up right away. I kept running the cloth through the barrel, slow, steady, until it shone. Then I put it away, locked the cabinet, sat back, and looked at him. "Why you saying that now?" I asked. He shrugged. "Because we've been talking, and maybe we didn't appreciate what you've done for us." His voice was honest. I could feel it, but I also knew not everyone in the house felt the same. Some still saw me as a problem to be solved. "I'm glad you understand," I said, "but it doesn't change anything. The rules stay as they are." He nodded quietly, stood up, and walked away. And I sat there again, alone with my coffee cooling beside me, thinking, it's not easy reaching old age and realizing you've got to draw lines for your own children. But sometimes that's the only way to keep order where there's been none. That night, after supper, I went through my papers again. I took out the envelope, the deed, the lawyer's letters, everything. I checked that it was all there, all proper. Not because my hand was shaking or I was scared, but because a man my age learns to make sure. You check your locks before bed. Same goes for your papers. I didn't know then that the next morning I'd have to use every bit of that strength again, because dawn would bring something I hadn't seen coming. A test, not of law this time, but of heart. At sunrise the next morning, I went to the kitchen to make my coffee. The smell filled the room like always, that same comfort I'd had for years. But then I heard something out of place, a sound at the gate, metal scraping against metal. I set the cup down, quiet, and listened. There it was again, a soft clink, like someone trying to force the padlock. I walked to the doorway, slow and steady. From there, I could see my youngest son out by the gate, crouched low, holding some kind of tool in his hand. He didn't notice me at first. I stood still, just watching. My heart was calm, too calm maybe. When he finally looked up and saw me standing there, he froze. "What are you doing?" I asked, low but firm. He stammered, his hand still holding the wrench. "And nothing, Pop. Just checking the lock. Thought it was stuck." "Checking it," I said, walking closer, each step slow but heavy. You think I don't know what you're doing? He swallowed hard, eyes darting anywhere but mine. I cut him off with a wave of my hand. You don't need to explain. Listen to me, and listen good. Whoever wants to live in this house does it by my rules. The one who doesn't packs up and leaves. That's it. He said nothing, just lowered his head. I could see the shame on his face, or maybe it was just frustration. Either way, he slipped a wrench into his pocket and walked back inside without another word. I stood there a while longer, hand resting on the cool iron of the gate, my chest tight but steady. Sometimes, even when it hurts, you have to prove that you're still the man of your own house. That afternoon, I made another decision, one even stronger than before. I called up Mr. Langston Pierce, my lawyer friend, and asked him to come to the house. When he arrived, I told him everything, start to finish. He listened, serious and quiet, and when I was done, he nodded slowly. Mr. Elijah, he said, this has gone beyond a family argument. If you want, I can prepare an official document, an affidavit, notarized, declaring that this property cannot be interfered with while you live. Any attempt to do so would be illegal. Do it, I told him. I want it in writing, signed, sealed, so nobody can twist the story later. He got to work right there in my dining room, setting up his briefcase, pulling out papers and a small typewriter he carried around. My children were watching from the hallway, whispering. They didn't dare interrupt, but I could feel their eyes on us. When the document was ready, I read it line by line, steady and slow. It said that while I lived, the property was mine, untouchable, and any act to remove me or alter its status would fall under legal violation. Pierce looked up. All we need now is your signature. I took the pen in my hand, and though my fingers aren't as strong as they used to be, they were steady enough. I signed my name, Elijah Daniel Carter, big and clear. Then Pierce signed as witness and sealed the paper. When he left, my chest felt lighter. I had done what I had to do. That evening, I sat again in my armchair with the radio on low, the document tucked safely in the drawer beside me. For the first time in weeks, I felt some peace. The law was on my side now. But peace in a house full of pride doesn't last long. Days passed. The air grew heavy again. No one spoke much. My sons avoided meeting my eyes. The tension sat in the hallways like a fog you couldn't sweep away. Still, I kept my calm. Each morning I brewed my coffee, swept the porch, checked my plants by the window. On the outside, everything looked the same, but inside I knew something was brewing again. Old men like me, we may walk slower, but we don't stop noticing. I saw their little movements, their calls, their sudden errands out. And then there were the visitors, young men I didn't recognize, coming by for quick chats and not even saying good morning to me. They'd talk quietly with one of my sons, then leave. I didn't need to ask what it was about. One morning, while I was dusting off my old radio out back, I heard my middle son talking in the kitchen. He didn't see me there through the open window. His voice was low but sharp. We need to do this before it's too late, he said. If we wait, it'll all be locked down. We can't let him get away with it. That's when I knew. They weren't going to let things lie. Even with the papers signed, even with the lawyer involved, they were still plotting to take what was mine. That same afternoon, I decided to make one last trip to the notary downtown, where Mr. Bonner, an old acquaintance, worked. I gathered my papers, put on my hat, and left the house without saying a word. When I got there, I told him everything. No soft edges, no excuses. My own sons, I said, are trying to find a way to take my home. I need this written in stone. Mr. Bonner nodded. We'll file an additional declaration, he said. A sworn statement that no one can alter ownership without your signature, not while you're alive. He typed it all up, had me sign twice, and sealed a copy in his office files. I walked out of there feeling steadier than I had in a long time. Now it wasn't just my word against theirs. The law itself would stand guard over what I'd built. When I came home, they were all there, sitting in the living room like they'd been waiting for me. I knew something was coming. I set my hat on the table, laid the envelope on top, and sat down in my chair. The youngest was the first to speak. Pop, we need to talk. I nodded, quiet. Go ahead. He looked around at his brothers, then back at me. "We've been talking with a lawyer. We think you're not in the right condition to handle things alone anymore. We just want to help, make sure everything's handled right." I looked at them one by one, slow, my hands resting on my knees. "So that's it. You think that because my hair's white and I walk slower, I don't understand? You think you can play owners of something you didn't build?" "Pop, that's not what we—" "Yes, it is," I said, cutting him off. "But hear me well. I may be old, but I'm no fool. Everything's signed and sealed. And I'm telling you now, if any of you try to change a thing, move a paper, touch a deed, you'll answer to the law, and to me." You could have heard a pin drop after that. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator. Nobody moved, not even the youngest, the one who started all this. I stood up, slow but strong, walked to the door, pulled the padlock from my pocket, and locked the gate again. Then I turned to them. "From now on," I said, "if anyone wants to come in or out, it'll be by my say. Whoever don't agree, there's the street. I might be old, but I've still got the strength to close my own door." And I did. I locked it from inside, sat back in my chair, turned on my radio, and listened to the blues, B.B. King on the dial, while the rest of them drifted away in silence. The day they finally saw that the old man they called useless still ruled his own home. But even then, something deep down told me it wasn't over. Pride's a stubborn thing, and when it gets inside family, it's like a slow fire. You think it's out, but it keeps burning under the ashes. I knew they had one more move left, and I was ready. After that day, when I made my rules clear and the lock hung firm on the gate, I thought maybe things would quiet down, that my sons would finally understand that I wasn't someone to be pushed around. But I was wrong. When money's involved, when greed starts eating at the heart, respect becomes light as dust. And let me tell you something. No matter how much you've loved your children, no matter how much food you've put on their plates, or how many nights you've stayed awake for them, sometimes they forget. They forget fast. It was a Thursday morning. I remember because Thursdays were my cleaning days. The sun was still low, the air cool, and I was sweeping the yard. The broom scraped slow against the concrete, steady like a heartbeat. Then I heard it again, a sound from the front gate. At first, I thought it was the wind, but then I heard the metal creak. I looked up and froze. There was a man there, one I didn't know. Young built, wearing a cap low over his eyes and dark sunglasses. He was bent over the gate, working a tool into the padlock. He didn't see me standing on the porch with a broom in my hand. I watched him a second, the kind of second that feels longer than a minute, then said quietly, "Who are you?" He jerked upright, startled. The tool clattered against the iron. For a second, he didn't say a word. Then he took a step back, eyes wide. "What do you think you're doing?" I asked again, still calm, still low. Before he could answer, my youngest son came around the side of the house. I saw him clearly in the sunlight, his face pale, his eyes guilty. And right then, everything made sense. The stranger, the tools, the timing. "What's going on here?" I said, looking from the man to my son. He hesitated, rubbed the back of his neck, then said, "Pop, it's fine. He's a friend, just helping me change the lock." I let out a short laugh, not loud, but enough for him to hear the disbelief in it. "A friend? Helping you change my lock? You think I was born yesterday?" He looked down. The stranger didn't wait for another word. He backed away fast, muttering something like "Sorry, man," and took off down the street, leaving his tool lying there on the sidewalk. I stepped down, picked it up, wiped the dust off, and held it out to my son. "Take it," I said, "and listen good. The next time you try something like this, bringing strangers to your father's house to break in, I won't talk. I'll call the police, and that'll be the end of it." He nodded, silent, shame and anger mixing on his face. Then he turned and went inside. I stood there for a long while, looking at the padlock, at the gate, at the street beyond. My hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of it all. You raise a son, feed him, love him, and one day he brings a stranger to tear down your door. That evening, after I'd cooled my head, I called Mr. Pierce again. "Langston," I said, "you better come over. We need to make things official. All of it." He came that night, and I told him everything, every word, every detail. He listened, serious, his jaw tightening a bit as I spoke. When I finished, he said, "Mr. Elijah, this isn't just a family issue anymore. We'll draft an affidavit and send notice to the authorities. That way, if they try anything else, the law will already be watching." So we did. He pulled out his briefcase, typed up the document right there in my dining room, and I signed it. Then he made a few calls. The next morning, 2 police officers came by with him. They didn't make a fuss. They walked through the house, checked my ID, took notes, and left a paper tape to the front door. A formal notice saying this property couldn't be entered, changed, or sold without the owner's direct permission. The owner being me. When my sons saw that notice, their faces told me everything. Shock, anger, guilt, it was all there. Some muttered under their breath. Others just stared, but not one of them dared raise their voice. That evening, I sat in my chair again, radio humming low, the smell of coffee still in the air. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even sad. What I felt was peace, a deep kind of peace that only comes when you've defended what's yours. Not revenge, not pride, just peace. That night, I looked out the window, up at the stars shining faint through the haze, and I thought about life. How I'd gone from being the man who built the house to being the old man everyone wanted out of it. How easy it is for love to twist when pride and money step in. And I understood something. A man only loses what he doesn't defend. And I wasn't planning on losing anything else. The following days passed in near silence. The house felt like a church after service, empty, cold, everyone walking slow, talking less. The TV stayed off, laughter gone. Each of them moved through the halls like strangers. But that was fine. It was still my house, and for the first time in a long while, the rules were clear. One afternoon, while I was sweeping the porch again, my oldest grandson came up. He's about 20 now, tall and skinny, still figuring out his way in the world. He stood there a minute before speaking. "Granddad," he said softly, "they're saying you shouldn't live alone anymore." I leaned on the broom handle, looked him straight in the eye. "And what do you think?" He hesitated. "I don't know. Just repeating what I heard." I smiled faintly. "Listen, son. A man can be surrounded by people and still be alone. What matters isn't how many folks live in the house. It's who truly respects you." He nodded, thinking on that, and left me to my work. I watched him go and felt a flicker of hope. Maybe one day, he'd understand better than his father did. But that very night, as I lay in bed listening to my old radio, something else happened. A thud at the door. Then another. Voices outside. I turned the volume down and waited. Through the shadows under the door, I saw movement. They were at it again, this time not sneaking, but bold. I grabbed my cane and stepped into the hall. "What's going on out there?" I called. The door burst open. The lock broke clean in half. 2 of them came in, my youngest and my middle son. Their faces were tense, angry. "Pop, this can't go on," the youngest said. "You can't keep locking us out. This house belongs to all of us." I stood my ground, the cane steady in my hand. My voice came out calm, colder than I expected. "All of us. Or me." They exchanged looks, caught off guard. "Tomorrow," I said, cutting them off. "You'll have a surprise. And I promise, you won't like it." I turned, walked back to my room, locked the door, and sat down on the edge of the bed. My hands didn't shake. I already knew what had to be done. The next morning, before dawn, I was dressed and ready. Light blue shirt, hat, cane. I took the envelope from my dresser, the same one with all the papers, and slipped it under my arm. I brewed one last cup of coffee, watched the sun rise through the kitchen window, and smiled. Not bitter, peaceful. I didn't go to the hardware store or the lawyer's office this time. I went straight to the county property registry. Pierce met me there. The papers were already prepared. I sat down, read every line, and then signed. The sale of the house, final and legal, not to my sons, not to anyone in the family, but to a third party, a man of Langston's trust, who paid fair value and had no wish to live there. When it was done, I stood up, shook the lawyer's hand, and walked out into the sun. The air felt light. The weight was gone. I got back home around noon. They were all there, waiting. I looked at them calmly and said, "This will be the last time I walk through this door. The house isn't mine anymore. I sold it." Their faces drained of color. "You did what?" the youngest shouted. "I sold it," I said, leaning on my cane. "The house doesn't belong to me or you. In a few weeks, you'll need to find somewhere else to live." Silence fell thick as smoke. Then I added, "I gave you my life, my work, my love. You called me useless. You forgot who built these walls. So now it's my turn to decide, and I choose to start again." I set the keys and the empty envelope on the table, put on my hat, and headed for the door. Before stepping out, I turned one last time. I'd rather sleep under a tree than live in a house where I'm not respected. And with that, I walked out slow, steady, cane in hand, heart light. I didn't look back. I knew it was the end of one story and the start of another, because it's never too late to rewrite your own path, even if it's with tired feet, a worn hat, and a soul finally free.